For so many of us, this is where it all began. If you get into photography in the 1970s or early 1980s, you would have encountered one of these cameras. This is the Zenit TTL. A lot of Americans think it's a Zenit. It's not, it's a Zenith. And that's really quite important if you're pedantic like I am. These were incredibly popular. And they were popular because they were cheap. When the Canon AE1 or the Minolta XG2 or the Olympus OM10 was around about 200, 220 pounds, these came in at under 50 pounds, and that made them very attractive for people with very little money who wanted to learn about photography. The other reason that they were very, very cheap is they weren't really sold as a commercial item by the Soviet Union. They were sold to get Western currency. So they could sell them cheap because the purpose of them was actually just to fill the coffers with Western money. The other thing that made them cheap, of course, was the fact that they were very low tech. If I look at the top dial, I can see the shutter speeds. The shutter speeds B, 30th, 60th, 120th, 250th and 500th of a second. The X on the 30 shows that is the flash sync speed, and that's for a very particular reason. If I open up the back of the camera, you can see that this has a cloth blind. As the cloth blind travels horizontally, for the flash to go off and sync successfully, it has to clear the whole of the gate, and that can only be done on these cameras because they are so slow at 1/30th of a second. Also looking at the top dial, we can see we have ASA speeds on this side. We have a frame counter on this side which you have to fit manually. We have a mechanical shutter with a threaded cable release, and of course we have the film advance. The lens mount is really crude. It's an M42 screw-in mount, similar to that used by Praktikas. They're cousins from East Germany. Clockwork timer, flash sync that goes in here because there's no hot shoe, and well, that's about it really. This little screw on the side is quite interesting though. I said before that it takes a 1.5 volt battery. That's absolutely true, but the original battery was a mercury battery which is no longer available. So you can replace it with an alkaline battery, but sometimes the metering is a little bit off. This little screw here allows you to adjust the metering to match the new battery that you put in the camera. Obviously you need to do a test run on it, but I think that's quite smart. The tripod mount is way over to one side, and the release for the camera is really not very sophisticated. It's basically that. The lens on this one is the Helios 44M 58mm f2 lens. It, by today's standards, is fairly crude. Let's put it onto the right setting on the lens. That'll help. You can have it set manually or automatically. On this camera, it's really a good idea to have it set manually because there's no stop down mechanism in the camera body to shut the lens down for you. The lens is what makes these cameras attractive today. This has a very, very interesting way of presenting the background, the out of focus background, which we call bokeh. And the bokeh on these particular lenses makes them very interesting, quite unusual, and beloved of a lot of photographers who then will want to put these type of lenses onto their more modern digital cameras. This particular camera was made 40 years ago. I know this because if I turn over the camera, the serial number of the camera starts with a 2-digit number. The 2-digit number on this one is 82. That means this camera was made in 1982. There are some exceptions with Soviet cameras, but generally you can tell the age of them simply by looking at the first 2 digits of the numbers. Now, loads and loads of reviewers will point to the build quality of these. They'll say it's industrial, they'll say it's really, really heavy, and one reviewer that I said, wow, this must weigh about £5. It doesn't. It really doesn't. I've weighed it without a film, and this weighs 985 grams. While that is no lightweight camera, it is about 2.2 pounds. Compare that with my Nikon D300S, which has got, frankly, a heavier lens. This is 40% heavier. And also, if you put them side to side, the Nikon is considerably larger than the Zenith. So that sort of dispels one of the other myths that they're so big. Yeah, okay, it's a little bit bigger than, say, the Canon T70, but is it really that much bigger? Would you actually be put off buying that simply for the extra few millimeters in each dimension? I don't think so. This was a massive, massive thing for people of my age back in the 1970s. You wanted a single lens reflex camera, you wanted interchangeable lenses, you wanted the look of having an SLR, and this provided it at about 1/5 the cost of a Japanese camera. Did it produce decent images? Yeah, it did. But I can't show you the images from this camera for a very, very particular reason. When people talk about the industrial build of this one of the things that they overlook, maybe because they don't know, is that it's really important not to store one of these wound on. And if you wind the camera on and leave it in storage, then you'll put in a lot of pressure on the springs inside. So when I bought this camera, it seemed fine, and I was playing with it, and I only took about 4 or 5 shots when this happened. I pressed the button, nothing happened, went to wind it on. Oh. As soon as I started using it, before I'd actually bought it, the spring went. And that is a really, really weak spot of the camera. Yes, it's really heavy. No, it's not. It's really industrially built. Yeah, but when it isn't. Okay, so it's a good camera, but you have to test it properly. Have a look at the cloth blind. Make sure there are those visible holes in it. Make sure that it winds on and fires. Don't do it once, do it 10 times. Try it on different shutter speeds. Look in the back of the camera at different shutter speeds when it's doing it. Then look at the metering system. Does it have a battery in it? If the battery's in it, is it corroded? If it passes all those checks, here we got a classic camera. Because this one was clearly faulty, I picked it up simply for the lens. And the price that I paid for the camera with the lens is, well, considerably less than the lens alone is worth on eBay. So I was still quite happy, and you get to see it, and that is quite an amazing piece of, well, everyone says it's not a piece of jewellery, it's an industrial tool, but I actually think there's a certain style about this camera which makes it quite nice jewellery to be wearing around your neck. So, the Zenit TTL. This is from 1982, towards the end of the line. It is a really, really classic camera. This one broke. Test one. If it works out, buy it. I would say maybe about £50, maybe about the same price as it was back in 1982. But with inflation, that £50 is worth a lot less now. So you can pick up a bargain if you like this type of camera. I do. I'm looking for another one like this right now. The lens on this one I'm going to keep, but if you just see one of these lenses on eBay and you see it at the right price, with a converter it will fit to micro four thirds or the newest mirrorless cameras, and it will produce interesting results. So again, Zenit TTL 1982.